Hey, thank you. This is Jeff. Yeah. Well, thanks for, I know coming to a session at all, so congrats. Good job of coming to another workshop. I know it's the latter part of the day, and so I can only imagine how full your brains and your soul might be. And so I thought this session, the way that I want to frame it, and I love the fact that Jeff's up here because he's always insightful, asking good questions, and he'll bring up counterpoints and pushback and all of those kinds of things. But the reason I entitled this Top Meta Trends for 22 and Beyond is as a part of what our business does is we are always tracking for our clients things that we see that are becoming trends. And I thought it might be beneficial for you to, what I'm going to do is maybe in like 5 minutes, I'll just do like a really fast, there are 13 things that I want to point out. It's going to go super fast. And then after that, as you're listening, maybe you could jot a note or two about things you want to dive a little bit deeper into. Does that make sense? The idea is maybe there may be an idea or two that you might think might be worth exploring as a nonprofit. But these are just general trends in tech, the way that people are working online. So there's a lot of things here that you may have heard at a high level. And I don't have answers. Jeff may, but I don't have answers. But I'm willing to go in the direction of thinking in terms of like, could there be any implications for a nonprofit? Does that sound good? Okay, so if
this session is going to be very meta, just like in general, just a meta, deep.
Yeah, not that meta, but yeah, good point. So let me just go through these real quick. First of all, let me just briefly say what is a trend. I think the best way to define it is actually just describe it. These are like not fads. These aren't things that will just kind of pass by. We strongly believe these actually have enough traction to stick around for the foreseeable future. So it's not just a hip fashion that goes by. These are things that are emerging. There's enough capital and ideas and companies behind these elements where you've probably seen a lot of these things already and will continue to see these in the years to come. Okay, so this is kind of on the, not the bleeding edge, but pretty close to it as to what's happening. But there's been years of work laid in these areas for you to consider. Sound good? Okay. And if you don't understand something, by all means, when we get to the kind of the Q&A contextualizing, please ask. So here's some of the top things that we're seeing this year and beyond. First, you've probably heard it in the news, and some of you are already into this, but you know the idea of a blockchain, which is a distributed, I guess I'm trying not to get technical, a ledger. So it's like an open network where data is stored where everyone has visible access to. So until now, a lot of things have been centralized, like banking systems and such have been centralized institutions. As the world has become more globalized and open, there is a network being created, if you will, where things and data are all out in the open. It may not be specific as to you may not know exactly who did what, but you will know the numbers that did what. So there is some level of accountability there. Some of you have heard about cryptocurrency. It's not going away. It may eventually get to a place where it will become a lot more. I mean, the SEC is working hard to create some regulation around it, which is very ironic given the desire of it flattening and giving access to everyone. And also NFTs. These are non-fungible tokens. Think of them as digital assets that are exchangeable for value. So we're going to see a lot of these types of creative ideas. A great example, a simple example of NFT is you may have seen a lot of artists get into NFTs. So basically, you create a digital asset, and you create one version of it, basically, or 20, depending on how many you want to create. And every time it's sold online, a small portion, you could create a contract where a small portion is retained by the artist. So to a certain extent, the artist is allowed to make a living in perpetuity for the work that they create. So you may say, what's the big deal with the digital asset? I mean, we're in the midst of, on the forefront or on kind of the frontier of people creating entire digital worlds. Obviously, you have that with Meta, but that's not a new idea. Many companies have been doing it. But within these digital worlds will be opportunities for you to take things you want to take in there. Maybe a digital car, digital clothes. Companies will start selling things in those worlds and already have and are incredibly profitable. So the question might be in your back end is, like, how do nonprofits play in that space? We could talk about that a little bit later. So this is one, okay? It gets more fun. The other thing is technology, polarization. Many of you are already aware the nature of things like social is designed in such a way that the algorithms do kick in and does reward reaction, right? Or it may be called engagement in a positive way. Others call it polarization. And because of those things that even like those who are kind of managing these algorithms don't fully control it, it's bound to create polarization. We've seen that in our world for the last several years. There is a rise in a movement to try to create civil media, which are more often private or controlled environments online in which people can have civil conversations. So that's sort of a reaction to all of the polarization. So there may be some opportunities for nonprofits to consider how to convene, not only for the sake of thought leadership, but progress of these civil conversations, and what will those look like online. And we could talk a little bit about that as well. The next thing is this idea of like customer relevance as a service. The idea is that customization will only rise. I don't know how many of you have subscriptions in your life, but probably more than half of Americans have subscriptions to some type of service or product or box. That's a very high number. But what we're seeing is that these boxes are becoming more and more customized as the years go by. So it's not that you just get a box from, I don't know, Blue Apron or some place that delivers food. You're going to see more and more customization in the space. Why this is important to consider, and we could dive into it later, is that nonprofits, people are going to get used to this level of customization. So the question is, what does that mean for, like, say, a donor? Or even like, some orgs have like sponsorships. To just kind of think ahead to mean like, it's happening so quickly. And people are getting very sophisticated based on all of the data collection and what's happening in retail, that I think some of those behaviors will naturally kind of bleed in, even though people may see nonprofits as a totally different category. But there's going to be behavioral consequences that are happening in the commercial retail space that may impact how donors engage in the future. And we could talk a little bit about that. Other thing is the multi-experience and the visual blur. You've heard of the merge between the physical and the digital. Add on to it AI, AR, VR, and it's going to be a seamless industry. Of course, words like offline, online are probably antiquated now. It doesn't make sense to probably many of our kids. They probably will look at us funny as to why we're having those workshop conversations. But it's the seamless idea that your experience with a brand starts way before you ever set foot or meet them in person. And so it might be like in the retail space, some clothing companies are working on, your own outfits, fitting it virtually, going to the store, and if you need alteration at the store, they'll have a tailor, physical tailor at the store making the alteration, and then they'll follow it with relevant content that's either associated with that lifestyle or something unrelated. So you're going to see a lot of continual just imagination in that space, which on the nonprofit, we work with a lot of nonprofits, and we're always thinking in terms of like, what is that donor experience now? Or could it be? And to what extent? And of course, this is all with limited resources, limited funding, limited capacity, but nevertheless, as the years go by, tools will become a little more accessible for organizations to work with. The other one is artificial intelligence. AI is aggressively evolving right now. A friend of mine, he actually has already 2 successful unicorn tech companies. He's working on a third where it's a learning company, and basically through AI, he's managed to figure out ways for human beings to learn 4 to 5 times faster. Think about employment training. And what it does is you're looking at the technology on a screen, and the technology will read all of your expressions, body language, and such, and will adapt content based on whether or not you're positively responding to it or not. This may have implications in education in developing countries. It's a very socially minded business, but they are going into some of the big brands and doing employment training now and testing out the product. But AI is continuing to evolve at a pretty aggressive rate. I don't know to what extent you use AI in some of your nonprofits may actually already be using this or some level of machine learning or just really cool like spreadsheet magic you do to leverage the data that you have. But thinking about data as well. How do nonprofits share data? What kind of data do you actually need from your donors? And there are some ethical questions that are definitely arising in this space as well. There's also virtual influencers that are. Go ahead.
Hang on, is your mind spinning already? This is like, okay, how are we going to hit all these things? But let's keep going through, and then we'll start asking some questions.
Yep. So virtual, and the last few, some of them are related, so we can kind of go through it quickly. Virtual influencers, these are fictional, almost like humanoids that are being created to create content. So this was initially done as a satire. You may have known this virtual influencer. She was started as almost like a satire against influencers, but she became an influencer herself. She's not real, but she has over 3 million followers. And then that group turned sort of into a media content company where they realized that even fictional characters, we watch movies, right? The idea of fictional characters having followings, it's like, watching like, I don't know, say you watch Marvel, and at the end you wonder where all the characters went the next day. You can imagine the potential of creating virtual characters, or kind of quasi, some of them are mixed with actual like mannequins and stuff, can you tell great stories and create content and also control the subject? In other words, they will not get into trouble unless you want them to get into trouble, for example. Think about brand relationships. So she's promoting like In-N-Out. She's promoting a lot of different fashion brands. You see her showing up in London, different countries with other influencers. So I know it sounds weird, but from a content perspective, there may be some opportunities to can we tap areas of our imagination for nonprofits to telling even fictional content that has some
activism involved.
Yeah. Yep. Just a couple more. Hyper automation, I think a lot of you are familiar with. That's definitely getting better and better. Democratization of technology, the idea that everybody has access to technology and thus can provide input. We see this sometimes used when there's a scandal with a board member or there's something that nonprofit does and suddenly there's an uprising, almost like sometimes a canceling of nonprofits. But a lot of questioning because people have access. They can proof check whether or not you're actually doing what you're saying. So we encourage nonprofits, if you're going to say something, make sure you can kind of back up some of that claim. If you say, we're the world's best, most efficient, blah, 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 I hope it's a true statement. And what about whatever you're talking about? Because people at your donor event, some of them are probably searching that to see if it's true. Data transparency, traceability, and choice. I don't know how well your organizations are protecting data. I think the big question about data is what type of data should you collect? Or should you just take the form and just collect all the information you can of donor? That used to be like the way that like nonprofits worked, is let's collect a lot of donor data. But if you don't have like the security and the ability to protect people's privacy, that may be a legal issue one day. And the other thing is, what kind of data do you actually need, and what kind of data can you share with other organizations or not share at all? So just kind of understanding how do we even collaborate together without data, or if we're collaborating with data, can we create, I've seen nonprofits work together to create dashboards around data around their city. Are there projects we can engage around data that can help us create more impact? And then, of course, the future of work, thinking about your teams, how this is going to work. We could dive into that. Diversity is not a nice add-on. I think it's essential to innovation. There's a lot. It's a human case. It's also a business case. It's an innovation case that diversity matters, but you guys, I think, are well understanding of this. You'll see the rise of more and more health, mental health, well-being apps, and there's a lot of venture capital money going into this space, meaning that kind of introduces the question for like even nonprofit leaders, what are we doing to create well-being for our team and such, that it's like a legitimate thing, and especially post, I guess officially post-pandemic, people, you're trying to hire talent. This is going to be a big part of the equation as to how you do that. So I'd love to hear some of your ideas on how your organizations are actually doing this. And last but not least, creativity as a social currency. Credibility is earned often through creativity in our world today. So creativity, and I know it's a lot to put on a nonprofit, but part of this is that people will gravitate to those who are creating new creative pieces. So understanding that, whether it's a new tech, a new expression, a new way to position something, a new kind of story, those are all things that are there. Now, you can't do all of this, but if there are a couple areas you want to do a deeper dive in, let's use the rest of our time to actually dive in.
Yeah, and I think obviously these are big topics that I'm sure a lot of these things at some point you've heard of or read something about. You might not really understand how it integrates into your nonprofit work. But I will say this as a story. My son is 9 years old. And to him, cryptocurrency makes more sense than the American dollar. Because all he ever has had is access to everything in the world. And everything has always been digital. And so as depending on who you serve, how you serve, the ways that you serve, like the people that we serve that are growing into the population that we will be serving, wherever you're at on that spectrum, these are the things they're already thinking about. So as we start to design programming, donor relationships, these are, I think, it might not hit all of your donors and all of your programs at this moment, but this is the direction that I think we're headed. And that's the point, right?
Yeah, I mean, and I don't even know how much younger people are necessarily intentionally thinking about it. It's just their world, right? It's like breathing. That's all they've known. So like, to your point, like a 9-year-old has experience with digital currency if they've ever played a video game, right?
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, Subway Surfer, they're already,
Collect all those coins.
They're collecting the coins, and they can get better surfboards. Like, this is part of how they think and operate. All right, so let's open it up to some questions, or let's hear where you want us to jump in first. Right over here.
Hi, I'm Megan. This is maybe not like jumping into a particular one, but more of kind of a concept question. We're obviously talking about trends, like you said, and these are things that are here to stay. I think something I've seen working in nonprofit is that once a trend becomes a trend, everyone wants to do it, and then everyone's competing for the same dollars to be doing that trend the best way.
That's great.
Like diversity, cool, that's important. Are you actually doing it, or did you hire someone that has DEI in their title? How, as nonprofit leaders, can we be intentionally incorporating trends and responding to new needs and things that are occurring, but in a way that doesn't get lost in two ways. In a way that's intentional to actually be doing that work, and two, in a way that sets us apart from the next nonprofit that's doing the same thing.
It's a great question.
A couple of nonprofits that we've worked with have created a budget for quote-unquote R&D, where they have preset resources to explore new ideas. And it took some educating of their donors, especially those who are funding their capacity building, to say this will help us become a little bit more effective, whether it's on the fundraising side or on the programming side. So they gave themselves permission and even started telling stories of why that was necessary in our world. And fortunately, most of their donors are people in just kind of the general professionals, and they got it pretty quickly. And in fact, they appreciated the fact that a nonprofit was thinking that innovatively, if you will. So that may be one way to do it. But it comes, I think, back to like, what are your stated values and goals? You don't have to do all of this, obviously. But there's some of these elements are like incremental, like, offering maybe through, there's definitely some platforms like BitPay and others that offer donations through like Bitcoin or Ethereum, or there's some cryptocurrency. So you may want to test it out and maybe run it by a small group of donors. Say, hey, does this make sense? Because in crypto anyway, the value could go up, it could go down, but it could go up, and the fact that might be, maybe use some of that resource and let it grow, whether you look at it as an investment or savings, whatever the case may be, and then allocate some resources from that to really push the org forward. So those are some ways that I know nonprofits are trying to figure it out. But you're right, the goal isn't to then, if everyone's doing it, you got to do it. But if you feel like your support base and your leadership aligns naturally, if you find that like half your team's really into it, then it might be worth exploring. Or if your donors aren't, into it, like, let's figure out and create a little prototype to see if it's of value.
Yeah, I would add to that, like, so these are big trends. The question that I would ask is, the community that I serve, which of these is most impacting them? And really engage it, like have conversations with, what's the organization you're a part of? Big Brothers Big Sisters. So obviously the student population that you guys serve, some of these are going to be very natural, whether you want it or not, to how they live, So start asking questions, and in the midst of it, every so often, hey, have you guys ever talked about crypto? Have you ever talked about NFTs to high school students? And the answer is going to be, yes, I bid on Nikes that were an NFT concept as a digital art piece for my character going forward. It's like, whoa, okay, so what does this mean for us as an organization? And plot off time and energy to start to dream about that, maybe with students, because they're going to be more interested and more knowledgeable than we will be, because they're integrated into that. So don't do all of them, but I would say, like, really try to have listening ears about which of these are impacting the community you serve or that support your work.
Yeah, that was helpful, Jeff. I'm trying to take these 13 things and trying to figure out how would I apply them to my nonprofit, my context. So the nonprofit that I'm a board member of, they partner with a hospital in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. And so, like, I'm trying to think through, how would crypto apply? Like, do we pay the employees in Bitcoin, or like, do we put it in a treasury and it gains value, it loses value? But hearing you say, like, thinking about these 13 things, especially within the context of my constituents, or for me personally, I feel like it's the supporters, because the folks, the awesome team in Port-au-Prince, that the medical professionals there, I don't know that these things will necessarily serve them or benefit them. And maybe I'm thinking about it the wrong way, but I'm more so thinking of the supporters and the sponsors and the donors, and how to gain interest, and just trying to better understand, what does creativity as social currency mean? Like, the Instagram influencer one made a lot of sense to me. Like, okay, maybe we need to grow our social media presence. Maybe we have more live video feeds showing the good work that we're doing on the ground in Haiti. I say all that to say, I'm curious to learn more about what these different concepts are and how they might apply towards the audience that I'm targeting, which is just mostly donors. So I guess that's not really a question, but maybe my question is, what is creativity as a social currency? How would I use that to draw up more energy among sponsors?
Yeah, I mean, I would think about it the same way I answer that question. I mean, there's a population that you guys are serving in Haiti. I think you said it, Port-au-Prince, is that where you guys are? That, honestly, it'd be interesting to look at these and overlay it into the population you're serving there, and what is impacting that community. Well, I don't know who all you're serving there, but I'm pretty sure they all have phones. They might, there's a lot of things they don't have, but they do have a phone. So, okay, so if every single one of the people that you're serving there has phones, how is our programming actually looking through the lens of the asset that they have in their hand every day to shape their lives in some better form? Wow, that just jumped ahead. For us, like in America, it's like, well, let's make a book. Well, that actually is slowing down the process to the people we serve there. You get what I mean? So it's like, I think taking trends like this and starting to go, which of these trends are impacting the people we serve, both from a donor standpoint and a programming standpoint?
Yeah, so technology might be an example. If people have access to tech, and it's all democratized, say. I mean, certain countries, there's definitely a lot of censorship there, but like if it's in a setting that allows for instant communication or access to resources, that might be just natural. It doesn't have to be a high-powered app in that country, but if it helps them do what they're doing better, or if it connects, them, I can only imagine in Haiti right now, we work with a nonprofit that works in Haiti. It's so mentally grueling. Some of our leaders have literally been shot at, attacked, trying to be kidnapped, all those kinds of things. I can only imagine where their mental health state is at. So thinking of like practical ways that they know that you are there not just financially, but you're going to try to give them some technology, mental support, all those kinds of things. I think there are some opportunities with pretty low-level tech to implement more widespread.
Hey, this is really blowing my mind, as the amount of information. But one of the things, I'm with Do Greater Charlotte, and we give kids the confidence to create, and we do a lot through design thinking with our kids and critical thinking and problem solving skill sets. But one of the things that we have looked at is kind of trying to boil down what we do into the core value unit, which what we call creative collisions. So how do we enhance the collisions between our students and our professionals in the creative community through our platform of creativity that we have? And one of the things that interests me here is this customer relevance as a service, this customization piece of how we can develop customization processes or products that connect those two entities together. I mean, one of the things we thought about was, as we program around our kids and teaching them these creative disciplines and concepts, to have even books like this that we customize, and then our kids' art goes on these type of individual books that we send to our constituents and our sponsors and corporate partners as well. So I think that this whole customization piece of how we can kind of continue to connect those two areas, or our students and our partners as well. So if you can kind of maybe delve into that a little bit more around how we can explore that.
Yeah, whether it's exactly in the way that you just described, I think, which are all phenomenal ideas. I mean, there's going to be opportunities for, like, say, maybe some of the students to create digital assets or NFTs, or create pieces that are physical that can be then leveraged in storytelling as well as fundraising. I do imagine that nonprofits, if they haven't already, may auction off digital assets in the near future. So that's a wide open, wild west, and it may give opportunities for, like, what we found truly successful is it's really hard to get like influencers. I mean, you've probably heard of influencer marketing. It's incredibly expensive, and a lot of the numbers don't necessarily activate people. So they could have 1 million followers, but it doesn't mean you're going to get the rate of engagement like once social was. But there are plenty of micro-influencers that probably younger people will know. Like, I ask my daughter all the time. She's a freshman in high school. I can't tell you how many times we've been at a restaurant or something. They're like, hey, that's so-and-so. Right? You're like, who in the world is that? And then but some of these like early rising influencers are pretty ripe for some type of creative project together. And I think everybody wants to do good, or at least give the perception that they're doing good for whatever reason. And I'm not here to judge motives, but I think we're still in the early stages of nonprofits thinking there are probably micro-influencers that can have a high rate of engagement. And it might be more cost-effective but more impactful. I think that's part. So there may be creative ways to mix some of these areas together.
Yeah, I'll give an example for our organization that I don't think I realized the progressiveness of it until recently as I was sharing with some other people. Most of my biggest asks for donors happen through text message. And the commitments happen through text message. Why? Because I'm asking them a specific thing in the way they want to be asked, that we have a relationship in there. So I always talk about, like, you get email addresses, that's fine. They see the emails, they don't respond. You try to set up a call with them and their assistant kind of slows it down. And then at some point I get access to their cell phone number, and then it's another level when you can text with them, and it's another level when they're sending you emojis. And, and all of a sudden, that's the progression of relationship with a 55-year-old donor. It's not a 15-year-old. And so I think that's part of the studying process. I don't know where it's headed next, but it's going to be a progression of that even further. But yeah, biggest gifts have happened through text message for me.
Hi, I was in listening to your discussion of virtual influencers and personalities. I was thinking about an earlier storytelling lab that we had today, and we were talking about the challenges of nonprofits. Like, I'm with Project Hope Alliance that serves students experiencing homelessness, who are very vulnerable populations, and we protect the anonymity and the dignity of those that we serve. So we don't offer our kids up or our youth up for interviews or things like that. And that presents a challenge in telling a very important story, both from an educational perspective and an advocacy action perspective. And I was just thinking, well, gosh, couldn't we create a virtual influencer that is a child experiencing homelessness and a youth experiencing homelessness? And so I'm wondering, in pondering and ideating that, what should I be thinking about? Because I can think about ethical implications. I can think about a myriad of things that are around ethics and discrimination and a lot of things. So what should I be thinking about because I'm going to think about this.
Let us know after you think about it.
There's some new books that are coming out. Sorry, I don't know if I want this on the internet, but there's some new books coming out related to sex education and some issues like that for children. My kids are in an age where we're talking a lot about these things, and there's some new books that are coming out that I think they have created some characters that are painting new pictures of what it means to be human. And on one hand, it was kind of jarring the first time I experienced it. And then the second side of me was like, this is a really healthy practice for people. So I think your question is really good. I think it's really hard to understand. And I also think there is a lot of people thinking about it right now, that there's going to be some experimentation of how to tell people's stories in new ways and invite people into that conversation. And maybe an organization like you that actually is in really close contact with some very vulnerable children or kids can tell stories in better ways than we ever have before.
And that's what I'm thinking about, engaging, for example, our youth council, right? So maybe it's a situation where the youth council kind of owns, in a sense, the virtual personality.
Yeah, I think the use of fiction is way underused. I mean, if you think about literature throughout history, fiction is very powerful. And I think it's almost like, a less practically used art. And so one of the organizations that Jeff briefly mentioned is called Laundry Love, that I've been a part of for about 20 years. And so in order to tell the story of the working poor, if you will, those experiencing poverty or working, and sometimes they're making decisions between laundry or dinner. And so we have like 300 locations around the U.S. where we offer free washing of clothes and other services depending on the needs of that group coming to that laundromat. We decided to create a coloring book for kids that tell the story of human dignity. So it doesn't have to be like virtual in that sense, but it could be other ways, other mediums through which you could tell and share values and express that, but do it in kind of a creative format. And people have responded really well to those.
I think we have time for like one more question. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Kim Williams from Usher's New Look. Two things that come to mind when you talk about technology and all these great trends. One of the top things I think about is the gap in terms of, as we're progressing so quickly in technology and all these strides that we're making, there's for us still opportunities to have to educate our young people, provide them with tools, right? Because some of our youth don't necessarily have all the tools that it takes, other than a cell phone, right, to be able to even partake in that. So educational opportunities comes to mind in terms of, especially around NFTs and crypto and things of that nature. Someone else said something, I think, about influencers. So I'll share a funny story. So whenever we found whenever we use like Usher for like fundraising, it doesn't work. So you think about having a celebrity organization, I would say there's a plus to that from a visibility perspective, but then I think it was another session where someone said at the Ron Clark session, people said, he has money. What do you need our money for? Right. So there's all these nuances. We might use that for a visibility post, and we'll get like thousands of, oh, you're so cute. That's not what we're trying to do. So we've had to really kind of dial that back and leverage him when there's something very intentional as it relates to programming or an event, and where youth are the center focus of what we're trying to communicate. But our influencers that we've started to leverage more so are our young people. So we've really tried, and we started that before the pandemic, but post-pandemic we're back in sessions now in person. So we've really been more intentional about trying to let our youth kind of lead our communications as well.
Which is very smart because like most of the algorithms favor teenagers.
Yeah.
So that's why you may have 800 followers, and for a teenager, they post something, 500 likes.
Right.
So that behavior is rewarded, and we could debate whether or not that's what they ought to do.
Right.
But that's the reality. So I think, everyday people, if you will, we have influence.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the trend that you didn't put up there, I think, is that on the backside of all of these meta trends, often they're rooted in technology, is the desire for non-technology experiences. And that's the one that I think will only increase, where you will pay more money. I'm saying you, meaning literally all of us, because we all want it to, like for someone to steal our phone for a week, where we can get off of the grid. I think there's and I think we've all been kind of dancing around that for a while, but I do think there will be a strong trend in more and more experiences to separate ourselves from the connectivity for seasons, not forever. And I don't know. That would be
You see that in concerts happening now. Recently took our family to go see Silk Sonic, Bruno Mars, and Anderson .Paak, and they took all our phones. And they made fun of it. They wrote a song about it, but it was cool just to be present. Yeah.
Charles, before we're done, I would love to ask you, just like as a nonprofit leader, this can be overwhelming. It's just a lot to process. It seems like we don't have enough budgets to handle thinking about how AI is going to affect the community we serve. Let's be crystal clear. So last thought from you, knowing this, where do you implement that today?
Yeah, I think you may have people in your network and others who work in these spaces too. And it might be as simple as grabbing some time with them and say, can I have an hour with you to talk about X, Y, and Z, because I need more context. So you don't have to do the heavy lift of all the research, but you could have a couple of voices around the table and do 1 hour coffee. I think they'll give their time for a worthy cause. And so I think it's those little things. And then if you feel like some things really have some potential, surround that with some people on your team to say, hey, is this really there? Are there other nonprofits maybe even doing it? And do some basic homework. And once again, I don't want you to feel that you have to do all of this. You're still going to impact people. But if there are some tools that are emerging, you feel like that could potentially actually help us scale, help us really serve our people better, then it's worth exploring, worth the investment.
Okay. Let's thank Charles Lee for joining us today. Love it.